Essay number 31. Do you argue intelligently? From defensiveness to rebuttal, the 7 main ways people fight. Have you ever been in an argument where you walked away feeling like nothing was actually resolved? Where both of you just ended up more frustrated than when you started? Where you can't even remember what the original point was because you got so lost in the back and forth? Here's the thing about arguing. At its most basic level, it's not even a choice. It's a reflex. When we feel threatened, our ancient brain kicks in with one of 3 responses: fight, flight, or freeze. And for a lot of us, fight is the default. Someone challenges our opinion, questions our intelligence, or contradicts our worldview, and before we even realize what's happening, we're in combat mode. Eventually, most of us figure out that unconsciously reacting to every perceived threat is exhausting. We start to develop some self-awareness, some ability to pause before we respond. We learn to censor ourselves, to think before we speak, to choose our battles. This is growth. This is maturity. But here's what nobody talks about. Arguing isn't inherently bad. When done intelligently, arguing is how we communicate that something matters to us. It's how we defend important principles. It's how we work through disagreements to find truth. Someone who knows how to argue well isn't just good at winning fights. They're masters of communication, negotiation, persuasion. They excel in business, in relationships, in any situation where ideas need to be exchanged and evaluated. The problem is that most people don't know how to argue intelligently. They think they're making points when they're really just making noise. They think they're being logical when they're really being emotional. They think they're winning when they're really just exhausting the other person into giving up. So let's talk about the hierarchy of argumentation, from the absolute worst ways people fight to the actually effective methods. Think of this as a ladder, where each rung represents a slightly more sophisticated way of engaging in disagreement. Most people never make it past the bottom few rungs, which is why most arguments feel so pointless. At the very bottom, we have name-calling. This is kindergarten-level argumentation. Someone says something you don't like, and you respond with, "You're an idiot," or "That's stupid," or whatever creative insult you can come up with. You're not addressing their point at all. You're not even trying. You're just throwing verbal rocks because you feel threatened and don't know what else to do. The thing about name-calling is that it immediately reveals you've lost. If you had an actual argument, you'd make it, but you don't, so you resort to insults. It's like showing up to a chess match and flipping the board because you don't know how to play. Everyone can see what you're doing, and nobody's impressed. One step up from name-calling, we have ad hominem attacks. This is slightly more sophisticated, but still completely ineffective. Instead of calling someone a name, you attack their character or authority to make the argument. Who are you to talk about healthy eating when you're overweight? You can't speak about marriage when you're divorced. Your opinion on politics doesn't matter because you didn't go to college. The problem with ad hominem is that it completely misses the point. A smoker can accurately say that smoking is bad for you. A person who's bad with money can give good financial advice they don't follow themselves. The truth of a statement doesn't depend on who's saying it. 2 + 2 = 4, whether it's said by Einstein or your drunk uncle. When you attack the person instead of the argument, you're basically admitting you can't attack the argument itself. Next up the ladder, we have responding to tone. This is when you criticize how someone said something instead of what they said. "I don't like your attitude. Why are you being so aggressive? You could have said that nicer. Your sarcasm is unnecessary." Now, sometimes tone matters. If someone's being genuinely abusive or disrespectful, that needs to be addressed. But more often, focusing on tone is a deflection technique. You don't want to deal with the substance of what they're saying, so you make the conversation about how they're saying it. It's particularly effective because it puts the other person on the defensive about their communication style, instead of keeping focus on the actual issue. Moving up, we find contradiction. This is where you simply state the opposite of what the other person said, maybe with a tiny bit of evidence, but not really. "No, that's wrong. That's not true. Actually, it's the opposite." You're not really engaging with their argument, you're just automatically disagreeing, like a reflex. People who constantly contradict are usually arguing for the sake of arguing. They have some emotional need to oppose, to resist, to not validate the other person. Maybe they feel threatened by agreement. Maybe they think constant disagreement makes them seem smart or independent. But contradiction without substance is just noise. It doesn't move the conversation forward. It doesn't reveal truth. It just creates friction. Now we're getting to the more intelligent forms of argumentation. Counterargument is when you contradict someone, but then actually back it up with reasoning and evidence. You're not just saying, "You're wrong." You're saying, "You're wrong, and here's why, and here's evidence to support my position." This is where real discussion can begin. You're engaging with ideas, not just reflexively opposing them. You're bringing something to the table beyond just disagreement. You're contributing to the search for truth rather than just trying to win. Even better is refutation. This is when you find the actual flaw in someone's argument and explain why it's a flaw. You're not just presenting your own opposing view. You're showing specifically where their logic breaks down, where their evidence is weak, where their reasoning doesn't hold up. You might quote them directly, showing the internal contradiction in their own words. You might point out the logical fallacy they're using. You might identify the false premise their conclusion rests on. Refutation requires you to actually understand the other person's argument. You can't refute what you don't comprehend. This forces you to listen, to engage, to think. It's not about winning through volume or persistence. It's about winning through superior reasoning. At the very top of the hierarchy is refuting the central point. This is the gold standard of argumentation. You identify the core thesis of someone's position, not the peripheral details, not the supporting arguments, but the fundamental claim, and you systematically dismantle it with logic, evidence, and reasoning. This requires real intellectual work. You have to understand not just what someone is saying, but why they're saying it. You have to identify what really matters in their argument versus what's just window dressing. You have to be able to articulate their position, possibly even better than they can, and then show why it doesn't hold up. When you refute the central point effectively, the entire argument collapses. All the supporting details become irrelevant because the foundation they were built on has been removed. This is how you actually change minds, how you actually win arguments that matter. But here's the thing most people don't realize. The goal shouldn't always be to get to the top of this hierarchy. Sometimes the appropriate response to a bad argument is to point out that it's a bad argument. If someone's entire position is built on ad hominem attacks, sometimes the best response is to simply identify that's what they're doing and refuse to engage until they can make a real argument. The real skill is knowing which level of argumentation is appropriate for the situation. If someone makes a thoughtful, well-reasoned argument, you should respond in kind. If someone's just name-calling, you probably shouldn't waste your time crafting a detailed, logical refutation. They're not operating at that level, and they probably won't understand or appreciate your response. There's also the question of whether arguing is even worth it. Not every disagreement needs to become a debate. Not every wrong opinion needs to be corrected. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is recognize that an argument won't be productive and choose not to engage. But when you do choose to argue, when something important is at stake, when truth matters, when minds could genuinely be changed, you need to do it intelligently. You need to engage with actual ideas, not just your emotional reactions to them. You need to address what people are really saying, not what you wish they were saying, or what's easier to argue against. Most importantly, you need to be willing to be wrong. The best arguers aren't the ones who never lose. They're the ones who are genuinely searching for truth rather than just trying to win. They're willing to change their minds when presented with better arguments. They can admit when someone has made a good point, even if it contradicts their position. Because here's the ultimate truth about arguing. If you're not willing to change your mind, you're not really arguing. You're just performing. You're going through the motions of disagreement without any real engagement. You're wasting everyone's time, including your own. The hierarchy of argumentation isn't just about winning fights more effectively. It's about raising the level of discourse. It's about having real conversations about things that matter instead of just shouting past each other. It's about finding truth through rigorous examination of ideas rather than just defending whatever position you happen to start with. So the next time you find yourself in an argument, ask yourself, where am I on this hierarchy? Am I name-calling or am I refuting central points? Am I attacking the person or am I engaging with their ideas? Am I arguing to win or am I arguing to understand? Because how you argue reveals who you are. It shows whether you're someone who can engage with complex ideas or someone who just reacts emotionally to disagreement. It shows whether you're interested in truth or just in being right. It shows whether you're intellectually honest or just intellectually defensive. You can learn to argue better. You can climb this hierarchy. You can become someone who engages intelligently with disagreement rather than just reflexively fighting against it. But it requires conscious effort. It requires self-awareness. It requires being willing to do the hard work of actually understanding what other people are saying before you try to refute it. The question is, are you willing to do that work? Or are you content to stay at the bottom of the hierarchy, calling names and attacking character while the real conversation happens above you? The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, everyone else can see which choice you're making. Every time you argue, you're showing everyone exactly how intelligent your argumentation really is.